Go live. All right. Looks like we are up and good to go on YouTube. Looks like the same can be said for Facebook. Let's move this a little bit closer here. All right. Welcome in, everybody. It was an extremely busy day. Tuesday, January 5th. My name is Connor Riley here with Dog Nation. Looks like we're finally up and running on Facebook over there. Welcome in. We'll give everyone a few minutes, seconds, 2 minutes to come on in tonight, listen to our little chat, talk about a very busy day for Georgia football. I got a lot of good news for the most part, specifically regarding to what the 2021 offense looks like. Obviously, the big news of the day, JT Daniels is coming back. That's huge for Georgia and what could possibly be a very big year for this program, especially when we know about offenses now and in this day and age, bringing back a quarterback, bringing back now your top 5 pass catchers from this 2020 team and what looks like a pretty talented offensive line should be a very, very good to borderline great offense next year. And Alabama's the best team in the country. Ohio State right now is proven to be number 2. Both those teams have dynamic offenses, and defense obviously doesn't carry the same weight that it used to in college football, but Georgia's still got a lot of talent there, and you have to trust that they're going to figure it out. And if Georgia's offense takes another leap like it did sort of towards the end of the season, it allows for you to regress a little bit on that defensive side of the football. So welcome in, everybody. Bo Bridges, good to see you. Thomas Gwynn, and if I mispronounce your last name, sorry about that. Bob Page, welcome in. Yeah, Isaac Cruz, the other big news. James Cook and Devontae Wyatt both announced that they're going to come back next season as well. The Cook one's really interesting to me, obviously, with his brother being in the NFL. You could see the theoretical path for him to decide to go there. He definitely has, I think, an NFL skill set. So for him to come back, I think really helps that running back room. It makes what Zamir White chooses to do all the more interesting because we've talked before on this platform. We'll probably get into it tonight. Larry Goldberg on YouTube, good to see you. Ease Brown. We've talked in the past about the sort of the correlation, 16, 17, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, and the possibility of 2021 James Cook and Zamir White and the sort of, possible similarities that you have there with those 4 running backs. So Cook came back today. Matt Talley, good to see you. Josh Hobbs, welcome in. So a lot of news, really stemming from last week. We saw, Georgia win their Peach Bowl. We can get into a little bit of that in that game, what I sort of saw from that. So busy show ahead. So let's go ahead and start with the big news of the day. That would be Georgia getting JT Daniels back and into similar degree, getting back James Cook, bringing back Devontae Wyatt. With those names coming back, Daniels obviously the most important one. Georgia's passing offense should pretty easily be the best of Kirby Smart's tenure. They're going to bring back Todd Monken as their offensive coordinator. I think that's really going to help to have that offseason continuity. We don't know what it's going to look like in terms of G-Day, dates, and whatnot, but I have a pretty good feeling that they're going to be able to figure out some way to put on a spring practice and have that, and that's going to be, I believe, pay huge dividends to what this Georgia team and what all college football teams, to an extent, are able to do and put out on the season next year. So with Daniels coming back, you have that passing offense. They will have their top 5 receivers in terms of yardage from this past year. Kearis Jackson, who edged out George Pickens by a yard. Jackson had 5. They both had 36 catches. Jackson had 514. Pickens had 513. You have Jermaine Burton, who made some nice plays over the course of the season. You have James Cook, who had some big plays specifically in that Alabama game that comes to mind. You have Darnell Washington as well. Those sort of top 5 guys, not to mention Arian Smith, Marcus Rosemy-Jackson, Dominic Blaylock, all guys that missed time due to injury this year that could potentially play a role in this offense. And that doesn't even mention a guy like Arik Gilbert, who is now officially in the transfer portal. Been some, the original tweet that he announced and deleted it. There was some talk that he had not officially and was weighing it. Ed Orgeron came out today and said he was. And then a little bit later on, it comes out that he is officially in the portal. So Georgia's passing offense should be exceptional next year. The offensive line is probably going to look a little bit different, and I'll be interested to see how that gels, especially at first game of the year against a very good Clemson defensive front. Trey Hill declares for the draft. Ben Cleveland, we knew, was already going. We're waiting to see what happens with Jamari Sawyer and Justin Schaefer. Georgia's recruited incredibly well along the offensive line, and they have talented guys that are ready to step up and play. They've got potentially 3 5-stars who, depending on what Georgia does, if Xavier Truss wins that left tackle spot, there's a chance you have guys like Clay Webb, Broderick Jones, and Amarius Mims, who are all consensus 5-star prospects, not starting at Georgia next year. So the depth and the pieces are there. I just think with the offensive line, the big question, especially that first game of the year against Clemson, is going to be a really interesting test with that offensive line and what they do. So we'll sort of see how things go, in that game. But the long-term trajectory of the offense for next year, I expect next year's offense should easily be the best, especially with Cook back as well and what he brings as a runner. Even if Zamir does decide to go pro, and make no mistake about it, Georgia is better next year with Zamir White on its team. He is far and away the best pass blocker that they have, and given some of the offensive line issues that you've seen, I think that's maybe something that gets very much overlooked. He's still an effective running back. He had a higher yards per carry rate or yards per attempt rate than Kenny McIntosh. Led the team in touchdowns this year with 11. Get 11 touchdowns in 10 games. That's pretty impressive in my book, especially against essentially an all SEC schedule. So John Adams were asking, do you see the offense ahead of the defense? Yeah, I do, especially what Georgia loses in the secondary. They, at the very least, they're going to lose the Count, Stokes, DJ Daniel, Mark Webb, potentially Tyson Campbell as well. Personally, right now, he has not made an official decision, but I would probably lean towards him being gone. You lose all that. Let's say you even do bring back Jordan Davis. I still think the offense is going to be farther ahead than where the defense will to start next season. So we will see about that. But ultimately, yeah, it's the offense. And with what we know about college football nowadays, offense wins you games and offense wins you championships. Defenses is nice, but in these big games against equally talented competition, Ohio State beat Clemson not because of Ohio State's defense. Ohio State beat Clemson because Ohio State's offense was significantly better than Clemson's defense. In the other playoff game, Alabama beat Notre Dame because Alabama's offense was significantly better than Notre Dame's defense. That's just Alabama beat Georgia this season because Alabama's offense was significantly better than Georgia's offense. Like, that is just the reality that it is. So we sort of need to see this Georgia offense, one, obviously live up to the hype, but beyond that, execute at a high level. And you look at some of the teams next year that will be gone, or that the usual suspects, so to say. Alabama's going to lose most likely Mac Jones, Najee Harris, Devontae Smith, Alex Leatherwood, Landon Dickerson, Deontay Brown, one of their left guard, I believe, or right guard, excuse me. They're going to be gone. Clemson's going to lose Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Amari Rogers, Cornell Powell. Cornell Powell, I believe, is the other wide receiver they have there. And who knows what's going to happen with Justin Ross at Clemson. Their offensive line really, really struggled against Ohio State as well. So we'll be interested to see how that improves. Ohio State, Justin Fields is probably gone. Trey Sermon is probably gone. Chris Olave is gone. That offensive line, that is, in my opinion, the second best team in the country. And if you really look at what Ohio State and Alabama have in common, stud receivers, stud offensive line. Now, I would probably say Justin Fields is a better quarterback than Mac Jones. Mac Jones has been excellent this year. And it's not, if you had said that at the beginning of the season, you would have been like, duh, why is that even discussion? Now, over the entirety of, say, the 2020 season, you probably have to say that Mac Jones is better. But now, after what Fields did to Clemson, I don't think you can actually say that with a straight face. But Ohio State's going to lose a lot from next year. Florida already lost a lot. They pooped the bed against Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl. And, obviously Florida's still going to be a good offensive team next year, but to the same level they were this year, I don't believe that. So they're probably going to take a step back. Oklahoma probably doesn't, even though they lose their top 2 running backs. And, Lincoln Riley is still one of the best and most gifted offensive coaches in the country. So Georgia's going to have a chance, if this offense is as good as we expect it to be one of the best teams in the country, to be a team that spends most of the season in the top 4 instead of on the fringes of the top 10. And that really means that this is a team that I absolutely believe can put it in title contention and can put it in the college football playoff. I saw a tweet today, asking if not now, when for Kirby in 2021. And well, I'm not saying Kirby's on the hot seat going into 2021 or it's title or bust. Next year is setting up very nicely, at least in the preseason. Obviously, injuries happen, things change, transfers, etc. But next season sets up to be a really pivotal one for Kirby Smart because it looks like he's finally got the pieces in place on offense. As much as the defense struggled this year at times, specifically in the Alabama and Florida games, Georgia still finished first in the country in rush defense, first in the SEC in yards per play allowed. So they can still figure out how to do some pretty good things, and they're still going to be really talented. They bring back Jordan Davis. I think that's huge. Daniels back in the fold is great. I think if they get Davis defensively, that is equally big because it just means next year teams will not be able to run the ball at all. Georgia might potentially have the best defensive line in the country there. And while, they don't get a ton of sacks from those guys, they rely more on the outside linebackers. And next year, a lot is going to fall on the plates of Adam Anderson and Nolan Smith just because that position, for the first time in a while, just doesn't have the same sort of depth that it has in the past. With that defensive line, Georgia's going to be able to do quite a lot. So we will sort of transition here. We're at the 10-minute mark talking about the impact of JT Daniels, what it means for 2021. They are about to announce the Heisman. I don't have a vote. If I had a vote, it would be towards for Devontae Smith. He was the best player in college football this season. I don't think it was particularly close. If I had to define the play that won him the Heisman for me, it was Alabama's last touchdown in the SEC championship game against Florida, where they essentially had 8 or 9 men in protecting. He was the only guy out running a route and just beat his corner for a simple slant. He's gotten better since Jalen Waddle went down with an injury, and I was very suspect that would happen. And he is as great as Mac Jones and Najee Harris have been, and they have both been spectacular. He has absolutely carried that offense and opened everything up for him. Trevor Lawrence, great career. Kyle Trask had a great season this year with the exception of that Cotton Bowl appearance. But Devontae Smith, and I'm always someone that's more inclined to not want to necessarily reward the quarterback, but Devontae Smith is just an incredible football player, and he is the player for me that I will take away from the season who just dominated it, and I hope that he gets rewarded for it. And so, quick little Heisman spiel there. Brandon Berry brings up Georgia, Oklahoma national title next year. Those are going to be the two teams that I think get the most offseason sort of hype from the national media and sort of are the trendy picks. You wonder about Alabama, and they're going to have a lot of turnover on offense, new offensive coordinator. It wouldn't be a surprise to see them obviously not take a step all the way back, but struggle a little bit next season. Just given that Ohio State, new quarterback, we'll see there, though I expect whoever they to be to put up big numbers because the Big Ten as a conference is just not what it used to be. And Ryan Day is a very good offensive college coach, so we'll expect things big there. The ACC is still not good, and I expect Clemson to still win that league next year, but if they lose that opening game to Georgia, they essentially don't have, I think, a margin of error. Just given the status of the ACC, it sounds like Notre Dame is, in all likelihood, depending on where things are with the pandemic, going to go back to being an independent team and not a full-time member of the ACC. So I think that is sort of, the lay of the land next year. So Georgia-Oklahoma could very possibly be a national title matchup. It's certainly a college football playoff matchup. So, DM Mart 42 on YouTube. Ryan Day just outcoached Dabo Swinney by a lengthy margin. I know the final score may have been 21 or something like that, but Ryan Day just did an incredible job getting that team ready, identifying what Clemson didn't do well, and just beating the brakes off of them. So, Shabazz Ali brings up, can we put a bug in the ear of Gilbert about coming back to Georgia? Officially, you can now. Officially, Georgia can talk to him as he is now officially in the transfer portal. And essentially what that means is that opposing coaches, schools can communicate with that player, sort of let them know what the landscape is. And look, I'll give you the rundown we have on Gilbert. It was known that he is homesick. It was known that Georgia was very much a factor in his recruitment. He was a big fan of Todd Hartley. As much concern as I have about the tight end usage, and I believe that Gilbert does as well, they did start getting Darnell Washington more involved towards the end of the season, and there's no reason to expect that Georgia couldn't do the same thing with Tariq Gilbert. Obviously, I don't think he's going to produce monster numbers, like huge numbers, but Georgia will find ways with Todd Monken to feature him and get the most out of him. It's just, what do you want those numbers to be when you have to feed George Pickens, Jermaine Burton, Keiris Jackson, Darnell Washington, James Cook as well. So it'll be interesting to see what the give and take is with those guys. But you look at a guy like O.J. Howard, someone who wasn't used a whole lot in those lesser talented games, but on those big college football playoff stage games, just dominated Clemson. And you even look back to that Ohio State-Clemson game, Clemson could not cover Ohio State's tight ends, and that really opened up a lot of things, especially later on in the game as sort of an adjustment. But early on to start, Clemson just had no answer for Jeremy Ruckert, and that really hurt them. And I think in these big games, that's where you really see where the talent gap is a little bit smaller, a little bit closer. That's where you see the tight ends, I think, really shine. And Georgia, quite frankly, needs to win those games going forward. So having guys like Washington, having guys like Gilbert who stand out even on a field of athletic freaks, I think that really helps and plays into Georgia's advantage. So Chris Collins, you must be new here because I will never forget about Dominic Blaylock. But yeah, he's a guy coming back as well. Arian Smith, Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint, those are guys who had this season cut short due to injury. I'm probably the most pump the brakes on Blaylock just because it is 2 knee injuries to the same knee. So I'll be interested to see what his timetable looks in terms of coming back and how rushed he is. I expect him to attack rehab and know he is attacking rehab full as hard as he can. It's just I think Georgia's going to be a little bit more cautious this time around with Blaylock than maybe they were the last time. Not that they weren't, reckless with him or anything, but Blaylock was pushing very hard to be ready to go, was cleared for the start of camp, and maybe this time around. So like you saw with Zamir White, they slow it down a little bit, say, hey, we're going to ease you back in. We're going to take your time and make sure that you're ready to go by the end of the season and more importantly for the future than necessarily game 1 there. So let's see. Yeah, Keith Foles brings up the Kirby press conference after the Missouri game where Kirby had said you can never have enough good tight ends. That was a not subtle at all nod to Arik saying, hey, we want you here and we will find ways to get you involved if you are to come here. So DeMar, I don't know if you watched that Cincinnati game, but Cincinnati could not tackle Arik Gilbert on that one play where he bounced off 4 or 5 different defenders, and Missouri had a hard time covering him as well. So Georgia, as long as they're committed to finding ways to put Washington into matchups, then I think that, yeah, he's a matchup nightmare. Now, I don't think he is the naturally talented receiver that Gilbert is. Gilbert is one of the best high school football players to come from this state in the past decade. But Washington has shown, I think, in these last 2 games for Georgia that if utilized properly, he can pay big dividends for an offense. Matt Landers today it is announced that he is going into the transfer portal. He's the 3rd Georgia wide receiver to do so. So, Chad Williams, he wants to be JT Daniels' agent next year. It sets up really well for JT next year, I think, to make a run into the first round and potentially be the first quarterback taken in the draft because you see he has the tools. There are just some little things to improve on. His deep ball accuracy and obviously he completed the long pass to Pickens. He completed the long pass to Smith. But if those balls are just a little bit better, and I think that'll come with more reps, more offseason reps, working with Monken, working within this offense for a full offseason, those two passes are touchdowns if they're better throws. So there are little things that he can clean up. Again, it was still his 4th start off of a major knee injury that had to have multiple surgeries on it. So as he continues to get more comfortable both at Georgia within this Georgia offense, I think the sky is the limit next year for Daniels at Georgia. And that allows him to work his way into the first round. You see Mac Jones, no one before the season would have said that was a possibility. In all likelihood, it looks like there's a chance that happens this year. Joe Burrow said the same thing about LSU. He was at best, late-round pick going into his senior season. He works himself into being the number 1 quarterback in the country last year, which is ultimately the number 1 overall pick. So with the way teams need quarterbacks nowadays, if Daniels has the season that he had this year over the course of the full, say, 14 or 15-game slate, he's going to be a first-round draft pick. And, that's ultimately, I think, why he came back. He played well enough in those first 4 games under Todd Monken to sort of see the potential, to see the vision, quote-unquote, and know that with a full regular offseason under his belt, that this Georgia team, I think, can really do a lot of special things next year on the offensive side of the ball. Pete Ellis, do I think Jordan Davis comes back? That's the biggest question mark right now. On the one hand, I don't know what more he could do to improve his stock. Unless Georgia wants to try and feature him more as a pass rusher, but I just don't think that's his game. He is a destructive run defender. He's the best run defender in college football. He almost single-handedly takes away the ability for opposing teams to run the football consistently. and that is such a valued asset, I think, in college. But, Georgia's making it clear that Jordan Davis really loves the University of Georgia and really loves playing here. And the reality is, at the very least, he's going to be a dominant run defender at the next level. And, maybe with another year he continues to develop those pass rushing skills needed, because the NFL is not a developmental league. So there are pros and cons, I think, to Jordan both staying and going. I think ultimately it's going to come down to, does he want to spend another year at Georgia, get sort of the facelift and be the face of this Georgia defense and really one of the faces of the Georgia program, sort of like Richard LeCounte was for this past season? Or does he want to go ahead and start making money and earning a living playing football? And football is not – the NFL is not a developmental league. It is also not for long. So you have to try and maximize your earning revenues when you can. So if he's healthy and ready to go, I would certainly understand him going. It would be a big loss to Georgia, but at the end of the day, Jordan has to do what is best for Jordan. The Daniels edition is obviously the bigger of the two, but boy, with Jordan Davis back next year, that makes that makes you worry a lot less about what that defense is going to do over the course of the season. Obviously, they're going to have to figure some things out in the secondary, and what Tyson Campbell does, I think, will have an interesting impact on that, as well as Tyreek Stevenson. I know there was some chatter BA talked about on his show this morning about Miami trying to get him. Newsflash, a lot of programs in the country would be trying to get Tyreek Stevenson if they could. But he's not in the portal right now. There's no indications that's the case. He had to play the game, quite frankly, or that saved Georgia in the Peach Bowl against Cincinnati. And he's someone next year who I think is going to play a lot of cornerback potentially, and that could really help him out as well. So let's see. Questions, comments. We'll go about another 10 minutes here. What's a game day routine for me? So I'm usually up right at 9 o'clock watching College Game Day. I have a little bit of early morning work to do, various Instagram posts. If let's say it's a noon game, just checking on things. And this is really my quarantine game day, because from an actual game day, I'm at the stadium almost as soon as I can be. Tweeting, writing during the game. We publish a story at halftime. We publish a story right as the game ends. As soon as the game ends, we go straight to post-game interviews, which are held in my bedroom this year on Zoom. And then it's usually writing for 2-3 hours after the game. And really sort of a full day. I think the one thing, working from home this year, not so much at the stadium, is just the creature of habit things. Like I will still watch all 3 hours of game day, which I would not normally be doing with certain games. But I will say I do miss being at the stadiums. I miss seeing people at tailgates. I miss being at tailgates with friends before games. So it is something where, I learned to adjust this year, like I think all of us did. But like everyone else, I could not be more excited to hopefully get back to the stadiums in full capacity in 2021 when we get this vaccine rolled out. So very much looking forward to watching games from the sideline once again, as opposed to watching them from my couch. So great question there, Ryan. I'll be interested. So Keith Folds and Isaac, I'm sorry if I can't find your last name there, are discussing the backup options for next year. It's still going to be Stetson, and Stetson Bennett as your backup quarterback. While I know, again, he's not exactly the most popular person in the world, it's a really nice luxury to have a guy who has wins in big-time SEC games, in big-time environments against the likes of Auburn, Tennessee, on the road at Arkansas. To have that as your backup, even this past game, when JT Daniels' helmet got knocked off on a third and long or a second and long, and he had to come in for a third and long, they trusted Stetson to come in and make a play for them on third down, pick up 10, 12 yards, which is exactly what he did. So I know everyone next year is going to want to see Brock Vandagriff, Carson Beck get reps, but Stetson Bennett as your backup, you could not do much worse than that, much better than that. And I think he is someone that Georgia will be lucky to have next year in the event that JT Daniels does go down. So, obviously I think the future will be Carson Beck and Brock Vandagriff and how that battle plays out, specifically going into spring of, I guess, a year from now, 2022. But Stetson as your backup is a very, very good safety valve to have in case something ever happens to JT Daniels. So, let's see. Jason Scruggs, no, Zeus has not let his intentions be known yet. I think that's really interesting to sort of see what he does there. He looked like I know some people wanted to see Kenny McIntosh more. I know some people wanted to say Kendall Milton more. Zamir White was just Georgia's best running back this year. I thought he got better as the year went on. He was peaking towards the end of the season. I'd love to see what he does next year, a full season, another year removed from his knee injury. I think one of the things with Nick Chubb that you can sort of follow, again, Nick Chubb didn't have an ACL injury, much less the two that Zamir had, but he had a pretty devastating knee injury. And every season that we have gotten farther away from that knee injury in 2015, Nick Chubb has gotten better. And so because of that, I wonder if it's sort of the same effects for Zamir, where the more snaps that he plays, the more confident that he gets in those knees and looks more and more like the running back he entered college as. So whether he does that for Georgia next year for an NFL team, because I absolutely believe Zamir does the things that NFL teams like from running backs. I don't know how many carries he will get, but he pass blocks really well. He's a great special teams player. At the very least, he is going to be drafted if he chooses to do so. If he chooses to come back, that makes Georgia's running back room all the better. I think it would not surprise me in the slightest if he has a Najee Harris type season where he really becomes a dominant force in college football while also playing for a great passing offense. So John Gibson, yeah, that's sort of the rub where Stetson can certainly be your backup, but you have to also over the course of games find reps for Brock and Carson Beck really to sort of figure that out. Alabama has done that the past couple of years. They did it with Tua during that first season that he was there in 2017. They did it this year with Bryce Young. Georgia, while Stetson, I think, is still the primary backup, they also need to find a way to get meaningful reps for guys like Carson, for guys like Brock late in those games. So if Georgia gets those non-conference games next year and they're not playing 10 SEC games, which I don't expect them to be doing so, I think that's going to make the development of these young players a lot smoother and a lot better. So let's see. There was one. Zenti Allen says JT doesn't use his lower body on deep balls. He's relying on arm talent. As someone who watched Tom Brady and watched Tom Brady pretty extensively, Tom Brady's deep ball was never the same after he had that ACL injury in 2008. He was just not the same deep thrower of the football. So it wouldn't say your analysis there doesn't totally surprise me, just given, that's one of the things where, you're worried about a hit coming in and taking out your leg. You're sort of always thinking about that. So it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if it does have some sort of impact long-term on JT's deep ball accuracy. But I think you sort of saw this year, it doesn't have to be 100%. And with Georgia's receivers, with guys like George Pickens and Arian Smith who can go up and get it, or in Smith's case, go track it down, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be good enough to get it there. So Jay Shabs brings up, I missed tailgating this year. One thing I will say about the Cincinnati game, Georgia wasn't perfect in that game, and they still found a way, I think, to beat a pretty good Cincinnati team that day. The one concern that I had was how the offensive line looked. The defense just dominated and overwhelmed Cincinnati in the second half. I know they gave up that one big long run, but other than that, Cincinnati did nothing for the majority of that second half. Now, I really think that's where Georgia's talent edge came into play and sort of overwhelmed the Cincinnati offense. That was not the case on the offensive side of the ball, specifically along the offensive line. Georgia, and granted, part of it was dictated by them falling behind, but Georgia could not run the ball, only 45 yards rushing. This Cincinnati team is not made up of giants on that defensive line. Georgia really struggled to get movement there. They were playing a lot of guys in positions they had not played all season. Justin Schaefer was at right guard. Sawyer was at left guard. And I expect Jamari Sawyer, if he's back next year, which we do at this point, if he's back next year, it is as a left guard. So Xavier Truss at left tackle as well. I thought he got better as the game went on, but there were some really rough moments there for him as well. So the offensive line was very concerning to me in that game. And you hope with a full offseason continuity going into next year, they have a lot of recruiting talent there. Hopefully Matt Luke is able to put it all together and Georgia has a better line next year, because one of the stories that I sort of hope to write in the month of January or whenever that is offensive lines. This season, one of my big trends and takeaways is, and Kirby Smart said this the week of the Alabama game, his biggest concern, it wasn't necessarily with Waddle and Smith. It was with how good Alabama's offensive line was. In the second half of the game, Alabama's offensive line neutralized the Georgia pass rush, which first in the SEC in sacks this year with 32. That's a first under Kirby Smart. So the Georgia pass rush was improved this year. Alabama took them away. In the Florida game, that offensive line, I think, was what the difference was, along with Georgia's inability to cover a wheel route. Alabama and Ohio State, in my opinion, have the two best offensive lines in the country. Alabama 1, Ohio State 2. I think Notre Dame had the third best offensive line in the country, and that's why they got into the playoff. I think Clemson got into the playoff because the quarterback is Trevor Lawrence. So, yeah, Jerry Swafford brings up an actual spring drill this year will be really important. And to the offensive line, that's going to be really big for the development of the offensive line to get that continuity to be one of the best offensive lines in the country, because it's nice having all those bells and whistles and toys. But as Trevor Lawrence sort of showed, and it was shown in that Ohio State-Clemson game, if you can't block the opposing front, it's hard to fully utilize the weapons in the way that you want them to. And yes, Clemson didn't necessarily have the dudes at wide receiver that they traditionally have, but I think with Georgia's skill talent and with Georgia really with what Monken wants to do in these long, deep vertical shots, the reality is those plays take time to come together, and JT is going to take some hits next year. So the offensive line really needs to do, I think, a good job of limiting the number of hits that JT takes over the season. He took a lot of hits in the Missouri game. He took a lot of hits in that Cincinnati game. And the reality is we know with college football these days, at a certain point, you're taking all those hits. You're not going to be able to finish a season. So I really want to see how this Georgia offensive line comes together, what it looks like next season. Because the reality is, yes, there were a lot of problems in specifically a quarterback play this year. I think the Georgia offensive line needs to get markedly better if it is going to win a national championship next year, which is not something we really said all that often under Sam Pittman. So, and Francisco Hurtado, I'm sorry, again, if I mispronounce your name, it's never intentional. I'm just not great with that stuff first time around. Trey Hill's gone to the NFL. He was, I think, a really good player, and losing him, I think you saw a clear impact in that game against Cincinnati. So I see some people saying, yeah, JT needs to sort of, to avoid those hits, do a better job of getting rid of the football and not necessarily holding it on to as long as much. There was one drive there late in the game where he's holding the ball as long as he possibly can. Refs rule it a fumble, which, again, I wasn't really sure how that was the case. But Georgia loses a ton of yards, loses over 10 yards and puts them in a 3rd and 20. And if he just throws that away, it's a much more manageable 3rd and 10 there. So we'll go about 2 more minutes before calling it a night. Let's see if we can get 2 more good questions. Yeah, Matt Talley brings up, the offensive line and secondary are obviously the biggest concerns going into next season, but neither of them were specifically great, I would say, this season. So while, yes, you do have to replace some key players at those positions, it's not like they necessarily have to be markedly better to really show some improvement next year. I think that's a really good point there by Matt and something to really look for next season. So it's as great as Eric Stokes and Richard LeCount were. LeCount missed essentially half the season. So you sort of know what you have at safety next year, which I think helps. And then at corner, teams never really threw to Eric Stokes anyway. So maybe it opens up the rest of the field. But Georgia's cornerbacks, they weren't spectacular this year. They weren't as good as I think we all thought they would be. Certainly that came to be in the Alabama and Florida games. But also the reality of modern college football is it's just really hard to be great in the secondary, especially with some of these wide receivers you're playing against. So I certainly think maybe the value of having an all-time great secondary or being super elite in the secondary is just mitigated nowadays because good wide receivers just beat good cornerbacks. So let's see. Frederick Meredith, who's going to step up at left tackle next year? That's really interesting. Xavier Truss figures to have the first go of it in spring when that rolls around. Broderick Jones would be interesting to see what they do there. Warren McClendon, I think, did a really solid job at right tackle this year, and I think he's going to lock that spot down. So does Amarius Mims make a name for himself? I think that's going to be one of the more fascinating battles to watch and see how that plays out. So, and they're all a little bit different. Xavier Truss is obviously the big mauler type from the Sam Pittman days. Broderick Jones is just really athletic, great in pass pro, but probably needs to bulk up and get a little bit stronger in the run blocking game. And then Amarius Mims is a better prospect than both of them and sort of offers a great blend of the two of them. But he's a freshman offensive tackle. And as I wrote last year in a story I wrote around February, freshman offensive tackles just don't play all that often. They're pretty rare. So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of goes about. Xavier Kelly, who do I think can start at cornerback next year? I'll be really interested to see where they end up putting Tyreek Stevenson. He's a starter in Georgia secondary next year, whether that is at the cornerback position or the star position, we'll see. I'll act under the assumption that Tyson Campbell is going to go pro. That's sort of what I believed at this point. So, you have that. What does Keely Ringo look like? I think that's the thing we're all sort of most interested to see. Dan Lanning had some really positive comments about Keely coming off that shoulder surgery. I will say the encouraging thing is that it's not a lower body injury, so it doesn't really affect his ability to run. We're interested to see how physical he is in terms of tackling and if that guarantees him playing at the corner or star, because star is a little bit more of a physical position necessarily than the cornerback spot. So that'll be worth watching. Jalen Kimber, and then Nyland Green is a guy who physically has the ability and tools to play right away. So if Georgia, gives him a fair shot, and he's already on campus, he was going through bowl practices, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Green is a guy that ends up seeing playing time next year. So we'll do one more question, and then we'll call it a night. Yeah, Joseph Kennedy, the Heisman Trophy show. I don't like how it's an hour long or however long it actually is. It's weird as heck that it's on a Tuesday. It's like the ESPN bowl selection show that ended up being 4 hours. Like nobody needs or wants that. Let's just get in, get out. Jerry Swafford brings up Latavius Brini. I thought he really played well as the game went on, and is someone who I think is certainly a candidate for playing time next year and really turned a lot of heads. So it'll be exciting to sort of see what he does as well. Let's see if we don't get a last question here that I think is really good. We might just bounce. Let's see. You know what? We've got about 36 minutes tonight. We're going to call it a night on that. Thanks, everyone, for the comments and questions. Had a ton to talk about. I imagine we're going to still have a ton to talk about for the rest of the month of January. Busy time for the Bulldogs. There's going to be a ton of coaching carousel news that affect the rest of college football, and it wouldn't surprise me if that ultimately touches Georgia in some way. So, a ton of stuff to be on the lookout for. Tomorrow night, Jeff Santel before the hedges. Thursday, we're going to keep doing these cover fours. You guys seem to really like them. Brandon Adams every Monday through Friday. You've got Friday Night Mike and Monday Night Mike on the beat. So, ton of great stuff. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a great Tuesday night. Again, Devontae Smith, my pick to win the Heisman. I hope he wins it. So, thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and have a good night.